purpose of operational engineering? It's to create value. And creating value in a private equity style context, because I think private equity is the best at distilling this and working out what the levers are. And this is an example from a KPMG report out of the UK evaluating private equity's performance. So investment made in 2010, they bought at a certain price, they sold at a higher price, so that's the change in EBITDA attribution in terms of value created. The change in EBITDA is the growth in EBITDA in terms of the earnings. And then they obviously bought it with some debt initially, so they pay down that debt, and hey presto, you've got a value which is more than double what they originally paid in terms of equity. So it's like, for those of you who aren't sort of haven't been exposed to this stuff, it's like buying a house. So you buy a house for 100 grand, you borrow 50 grand, you put in 50, you do some renovations, you increase your rental income, and then you sell it for a higher price, and that's how you make money. This is the same thing with companies. Very easy. Not. So what's the traditional playbook in a 1.0 context for private equity, but increasingly companies are doing it themselves now? Number one, cutting heads. Reducing direct costs in terms of your GP margin line. Cutting discretionary CapEx. There's a lot of controversy about this in a private equity context. Reducing your maintenance CapEx. All sound very familiar, right, to anyone who's run businesses before. Increase prices. It's amazing how few people do this though. No, seriously, because they're afraid to. They want to do the other way, cut prices. Increase volume. So classic example would be, you buy Guzman Gomez, for example. So how do you increase volume? You just roll out new stores everywhere. Introduce value-based pricing. So what's the traditional approach to pricing? Cost plus. Cost plus. So value-based pricing. So what happens with cost plus? Cost plus pricing is you set the anchor in your own head as to what your cost base is, because that's a fact. And then you set a price which you're happy to charge because it gives you a certain gross profit margin. And that's really driven by your own head in terms of what you think something's worth, and also driven by competition. Value-based pricing is inverting that, or flipping on its head and kind of going, what's the value of this to my customer? So often it's selling on fear or fear of missing out. And it's had profound impacts on businesses that have introduced it in the past. Insurance. Or water, bottled water. Great example. Optimizing revenue mix, so changing the mix. So let's take Evolution, they're not here as an example. One of the things we do there is try to shed labor-intensive jobs and go for more equipment-intensive jobs because they're higher margin. And almost playing this game where we concede bigger jobs that are more labor-intensive to our competitors, and then pick up all the smaller jobs that they have to let go of. Optimizing sales architecture. This is right up John's alley, and Sean, etc., and Kelly more recently. So this stuff is all ultimately driven by analysis that's typically based on Excel spreadsheets using system-generated data. So question, does it actually still work in private equity? The evidence suggests not, more recently. This is from Bain. So this is a breakdown of multiple on invested capital improvement or decline versus the original deal model in terms of their forecasts. So margins have decreased, so that's detracted from value creation. Revenue has grown, so they've been successful at growing revenues. Multiple expansion has accounted for most of the outperformance, if you will, or returns on private equity. This is a global study done by Bain. It's said because low interest rates have pushed up asset prices and valuation multiples. So this is a chart of interest rates for the last 5,000 years. They interviewed Dirk in 1790. Sorry. But really low interest rates have been what's pushed up asset prices and valuation multiples, which has resulted in this, which masquerades this stuff. My view on why we've seen some operating underperformance, and this is not specifically to PE, this is just in general. Who was working in the 1980s? It's okay, you can put your hand up. It's a great time to be working. I always say I was born 10 years too late, because when I started working in 92, 93, that was the tail end. You know, my bosses were going for lunch at 12:30 and never came back. And never came back. Corporate jets in America, every S&P 500 company with credibility had one. Donald Trump was the poster child of the 1980s. Long lunches, having a smoke at lunch, cigar. You know, now you do that in London after 7 p.m. So that was 1980. So yeah, basically a lot of fat. You know, KKR. What sort of multiples was KKR paying for, you know, medium-sized businesses back in the 1980s? You're talking 250 mil EBITDA above, 5 to 6 times. What was the 1990s all about? Everyone remember the global recession in the early 90s? So the 90s were all about driving inefficiency out of your business, cutting fat, cutting silos, no more long lunches, none of that stuff. So this Kaizen, you know, Japanese TQM principles got into vogue, lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, et cetera, Who was the poster child of the 1990s? And all this stuff, Jack Welch, spot on. This was Jack Welch's era. What do we have today? Broadband speed, Google, mobile phones, Oracle, Amazon. This is the change in the corporate landscape you've seen over the last 30 years, from inefficient, bloated, kind of lazy. Then you went through this wave of efficiency, which was in essence this stuff on steroids. But you know, you had so much fat you could take out of every business. Companies are doing this themselves now. They don't need an outside group, private equity or otherwise, to come in and rip out those efficiencies. That said, you know, every large company gets bloated, nowadays more with compliance, etc. But you've got a far more competitive environment, you've got a far faster environment, more equal access to information. So short answer is operational engineering 1.0 is not as effective as it used to be. And this was reinforced. So I was invited to a private equity operating partners breakfast in London back in October last year. You know, top 10 mid-market PE guys, all the guys that were in charge of running their operating companies and the value, what they call the value creation strategies. And they all said this, you know, multiples are getting crazy because there's so much capital chasing fewer deals, and it's getting harder to find opportunities to, you know, drive earnings growth in the business.